In this video, I want to make a bright, colorful, striped woven wall hanging. So let's get started. We've officially reached that time of year, mid-March, where I really need color in my life and I really wish it was spring, but I live in a place where spring happens much later than most of the world. So I have to create the color instead of looking outside. Now I've grabbed all of these different materials. I try to keep it semi-simple because sometimes I feel like I get really overwhelmed when I go grabbing tons of different colors and materials. And I was like, you know what? Let's try to keep this one a little bit more simple. I would like to do stripes as well because it has been a while. I've been making some of these more organic, colorful pieces, which I absolutely love. But today we're trying something a little bit different. Full disclosure, I have no idea where this will take us, but I usually just start with a general idea and some colors, and then I kind of let myself work it out on the actual loom. Weave something in, ask myself what I think of it, and then go from there. All right, we're gonna get started with warping the loom. Now I've kind of pre-decided what size this was gonna be based on another piece that I've done. We're going to take some 4/8 cotton warp string and we're going to warp a single warp of 32 warp strings total. To get the warp started, I'm going to fold over my piece of warp string a few inches. It doesn't really matter how long this is, and I'm going to tie an overhand knot so that I'm left with a loop. So that just looks like this. So I've left my loop pretty small. It's basically just big enough that it can fit around one of the notches on my loom. And I do like to cut off some of the excess as well, just so that it doesn't feel like it's getting in my way. All right, so on my loom, if you're using the same one, I'm going to be starting on the third groove in, so that also is the third notch. And for your reference, this is a 4 ends per inch loom, meaning there's 4 warp strings per inch. You can find all the information on our Spruce and Linen flat pack frame looms at spruceandlinen.com. So then I'm just gonna go up to the third groove. Since I started on the third groove, I'm going up to the third groove. And then I'm just going to be putting 1 string between each of the teeth, the notches, whatever you wanna call them. And I'm gonna continue this process until I have 36 warp strings. In terms of the tension of your warp, I'm not leaving it super loose, and I'm also not reaming on the strings. If I ream on the strings, it's gonna get too tight once I'm at the top of my loom. So I'm being careful to have them semi-taut, but not tight, if that makes sense. If you want some more in-depth instructions for how I like to start every weaving, I'm gonna leave this tutorial right here. It's one of our most viewed tutorials, and it's super handy for this process. So now that I have 36 warp strings on my loom, I'm gonna leave a nice long tail, cut this off, and then I'm gonna tie a triple knot around this last warp string. I'm using my right finger here to keep everything tight so that that last warp string doesn't come loose. Next, I'm gonna grab the dowel that I will be using for the top of the piece. My dowel, for your reference, is 7/8 of an inch thick and it's 8 1/4 inches wide. So you can see that right now it's about the same width as my warp, but as I weave, what'll naturally happen is the warp will come in a little bit, and at the very top, we'll be gathering the strings kind of like this, so they will sit inside the dowel, so it's okay that my dowel and my warp are the same width. Next, we need to figure out how much length at the very top of the piece that we need to leave in order to have enough to wrap around the dowel using lark's head knots. So what I do to figure that out is I grab my warp string, it's still on the spool, you don't need to cut this. I'm gonna create a nice big loop. It's totally fine if it's huge. Then you're gonna fold over the loop like this. So now you have 2 loops, and then you're gonna grab these 2 loops, and that's what creates the lark's head knot. And we're going to slip this around the dowel like so, and now we can figure out this length. So I'm gonna grab my measuring tape just so I have it on hand. And what I'm gonna do is hold my fingers about a 1/2 inch below, maybe it's a little more than 1/2 inch, however much space you want between the top of your weaving and your dowel. I don't recommend, if you're using a lark's head knot, to go too close to the dowel because it'll be really hard to get it on. So I usually like to go a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch below. So I'm gonna hold my fingers here, slip this knot off of the dowel, and now I'm left with the length that I'm going to need. So I can measure that here, and that's about 3 1/4 inches. I know it's hard to see for you, but it's 3 1/4. So now that I know that measurement, I'm going to take a little piece of scrap yarn and I'm gonna wrap it around 1 warp string and just do a 1/2 knot. And now I can measure down my 3 1/4 inches and I can just sort of tighten that there and leave that there as I'm weaving so that I know where I need to end the piece. Next up, since I do like weaving on the flat, now our looms do come with legs as well, so if you prefer to weave up like this, you definitely can. For filming, it's so much easier for me to just weave flat on the table, so that's what I'm going to do. If you do like weaving flat on the table, I highly recommend grabbing some painter's tape and just sort of creating a loop and just putting it on the back of your loom so that your loom will stick down to the table and it won't move on you. Next, I'm taking a piece of cardstock. This one's about 2 3/4 inches tall. So I'm just gonna be weaving this in. I'm gonna go plain weave, so just under 1 over 1 all the way across my loom. The reason I do cardstock at the bottom is so that I have something very straight and sturdy to beat the weft down onto. You don't have to do this step, but I do just find that it's really handy. And once you've woven a little bit, if you find that your warp is getting too tight, you can slip out this cardstock later. Next, I'm grabbing the yarn that will become my base work. I'm grabbing Lion Brand Woolies Thick and Quick, about 4 widths of my loom plus a little bit. I always take extra because I'm worried. And I'm going to be weaving in a row of plain weave, then a twining stitch on top of that, followed by 2 rows of plain weave. Now that I have the base work done, the fringe is going to be next, and I've really been loving this combination of 5mm recycled cotton string and 2mm recycled cotton string, and I'm gonna do that again today. In terms of the length, this is whatever your heart's desire. You can go really long, you can go really short. I do have a video about fringe length. Now, I've kind of moved towards a shorter fringe length as of late, but it's really just a personal preference. So in terms of the length that I'm gonna choose today, I'm going to eyeball it, and I will measure it after I eyeball it. I think what I end up liking doing is that I like my fringe to be half the length of the woven portion of the piece, so that basically the weaving ends up being 2/3 weaving and 1/3 fringe. So that's kind of what I've accidentally done over time that looks good to me. Now I might make this a little bit longer so that I have some room to cut it a little bit if I need to. I'm gonna go about 11 inches for my first piece, but then what I like to do is kind of purposefully make the fringe not all the same length. What I've found over a long period of time is that if you're gonna do a super straight fringe, it's gotta be super straight. But if you do something that's kind of intentionally uneven, it looks just as good, but it's a lot less finicky to do. So it just kind of depends on where you want to spend your time. If you enjoy cutting that perfect fringe, all power to you. So I'm going to be cutting 16 pieces of the 5mm string and 32 pieces of the 2mm cotton string. Next, I'm going to grab 1 strand of my thicker cotton string, 2 strands of my thinner, and I kind of line them up so that the centers are together. So this one, if that makes sense, because they are now all a different length. So you can just kind of line them up like so, and then take them from the middle. And then I'm gonna be wrapping around 2 warp strings at a time. So I'll show you one grouping of the fringe being tied on. So I'm working around 2 warp strings. I'm grabbing the center. I'm gonna grab the warp string on the right and wrap it from right to left around that warp string. Then I'm gonna grab the left warp string and I'm grabbing the fringe and wrapping it from left to right, like so. Then I'm sort of lining up the ends approximately and then pulling that down. And then you can sort of grab the individual strings to even out this little knot. And sometimes I even like to end up loosening it a little bit so that those warp strings still sit nice and straight. All right, all the base work is done. The fringe is on. So now we're ready to get started weaving. And this is the part where I don't actually know what I'm gonna do. My instinct is telling me to start with the darkest color first, which is this green. So maybe I'll just start with that. So let's maybe go with like 3 rows of plain weave of this super thick yarn. So I'm just gonna be weaving in over one, under one. So basic plain weave or tabby, those are the same things. Now I am noticing immediately that the top is a little, or my weft is looking a little bit crooked. Sometimes it basically just means that you've crushed down the edges too much or the sides not enough. So I'm just gonna make sure that that's looking nice and straight. And there's my first stripe. Now, anytime I'm weaving, and in this case, I'm finishing going under a warp string, what I like to do is just loop that back around just because it gives a nicer edge. And then I'm gonna leave a nice long tail so that I can tuck that in later. So what do we wanna do next? I'm really wanting to use this purple. I've been wanting to use it in a piece and I just keep feeling like it doesn't quite fit. And so I'm determined that I'm going to use it today. Maybe I should just go ahead and use it next, or do I want to do this pink first and then the purple? I feel like the buffer of the pink might be a little bit nicer. Okay, so what if I did this pink in a different stitch just to make it a little bit more interesting? I think with this one, I want to keep it a pretty thin row because it is quite a thick yarn. So I'm thinking a single row of sumac maybe. And I think what I've found is like about 2.5, we're gonna try it. 2.5 the width of the area that you're doing the sumac stitch in. That's how much length I just took. And I might be completely wrong, but we'll try it. So for this one, I'm gonna go around 2 strings at a time. And I do have tutorials for all of the stitches I'll be using today. Specifically in this video here, I have like the 6 stitches I use most often, but I'll quickly show you how I'm gonna do this. So I'm grabbing 2 strings. I'm gonna take the end of the yarn and go from right to left and wrap it around and bring that back around again. I'm gonna leave a tail here so I can tuck that in later. Then I'm gonna grab the next 2 warp strings and do the same thing. So from right to left underneath, I'm grabbing that. So I'm doing a half sumac, so it won't look the same as regular sumac. It'll look more like a twist. So I'm grabbing the next 2 from right to left underneath. Actually, I don't even know if this is gonna be long enough. Kind of seems like it won't be. I maybe should have grabbed 3 times the length. I definitely don't think this is gonna be long enough. I might just barely get, yeah. So I just barely got to the end. I'm gonna move this all down now. So I'm just gonna start pulling from the other end, making this tail on the left a little bit smaller and then just tightening it up so that I have a slightly longer tail on this end. So I would probably recommend, for this particular yarn anyway, 3 times the width of your warp if you're going all the way across your warp. That's how much yarn you want for a sumac stitch. This will work, but it would have been a little bit easier with a little more. Okay, so now we have our second stripe. Next, I want to do the purple. So for this one, I think I'm going to need just a little bit more than the width of my warp. And then I'm going to split this in half. So this is the full thickness of the wool. As you can see, it's really thick. And a way to make your wool go further is to just split it in half. Now, if you want that really, really textured feel, you can keep the full thickness. There's nothing wrong with that. But I personally almost always do this method so that, again, my wool just goes a little bit further. So I'm gonna weave this in over 2, under 2, all the way across the loom. And I'm just using my fingers because for this, it's fine to do so. Now, I did make this a little longer than I needed to. That's okay. But one thing that you'll be noticing here, on this end, we went over the warp strings. On this end, we're going under. So one trick to sort of make that end a little bit nicer is that instead of going over or underneath both of these, I can just go under one and then go over the last one. We'll see if that looks good. Although I did need this length. So we're gonna pull this to one side like so. So we have a little bit of a tail here. And then everywhere where this wool is going over top the warp strings, I'm just pulling up a tiny little loop. And it just creates sort of this bubbly texture. So now we have another stripe. Now, one thing I'm immediately noticing is that the vibrancy of this is making this yarn not look as good. So I need to decide if that's something I would like to change. So I could go back and I could do this yarn instead, something a little brighter, but there's something about this one that's maybe feeling a bit pale. But I could also just keep going and see how it feels overall. What I can do in this situation is just start laying out the next colors and seeing how I feel about them. So I could lay out this yellow and be like, am I gonna really care that that light pink is by that purple once I have some more colors here? I do think the yellow after the purple could be really pretty. And then the other option I would have is the blue. However, the blue, I'm just saying all my thoughts out loud. I hope you guys are okay with that. I know some of you like that, some probably don't. But these are kind of the creative thoughts I'm having as I'm weaving. So I could do the blue next, and the blue does look good with the purple, but it's kind of in the same family. It's about the same lightness and about the same saturation. So then that makes me feel like maybe that's a little bit too similar. They're both more cool colors. But if I go to the yellow feels like it's gonna kind of pop against the purple maybe a little bit more. Now, when I weave in this yellow, that's gonna kind of squish this wool a little bit more, which can make it even more poofy. If I'm being honest, I don't know about any of this. I don't know. What would it look like, for instance, if I just grabbed this and I sort of lay it across here? Like, does that feel better? Huh. I am feeling very unsure. This purple, for some reason, just throws me off every time because I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, this blue, maybe the blue would look better. Maybe the shade of green isn't quite right. See, now I'm looking over here and I'm like, ooh, I really like this. Maybe with a pop of blue. I mean, I could use this. And I could use this. It's strange because when I look at the purple and the pink like this, I feel like they look good together. So I'm not sure what's throwing me off when it's actually on the loom. What would it look like to do? Okay, let's just try this. 1, 2, 3. I'm gonna try this without even cutting it. I'm just leaving it on the spool. And I just wanna see how I'd feel about it. Because sometimes I think what happens is that I'm looking at one section of a piece too closely and too critically. And then once I keep going and move on, it all works out and ties together. So I'm trying to decide if that's what's happening here or if I really do just not like the purple. What is it? Is it this green? Is it actually the green that's the problem? Okay, I think I've kind of decided I just have to keep going and see what happens. So, do I want to do this blue next? Okay, so now what has happened is I have fallen into a pattern, which isn't bad, but I just want to point that out because I'm not sure if I want this to look more random or if I want to do what I've just done, which is we've got plain weave, half sumac, and then this bubble stitch, and then plain weave, half sumac, bubble stitch. So I kind of need to decide, am I just going with that as my pattern? Because if I repeat it twice and then not at all, it's probably gonna look a little weird. I'm not mad about it repeating, but I wasn't really setting out to create a very repeating pattern. And I'm still feeling really unsure about the colors. Let's try something else. So I took out the blue and I kind of want to just try this green instead. Oh, I think I'm already liking that more. Okay. I'm definitely liking the green more than the blue. Do I like that pink as the next color? I don't dislike it. This might be a little bit too dark. Ooh. I'm at a point in my life when I'm trying to like push myself a little bit with color, to not just be like, oh, well, that doesn't quite go, but maybe it does. And I'm really liking some more retro color palettes lately as well. This is why it makes it hard, because I'm just sitting here thinking, is it good weird or is it just weird weird? Okay, I kind of love the orange. I think I just have to take this purple out. I'm not loving it. I haven't found the way that I want to use it in terms of the color combination. So I'm just gonna carefully pull this out. I can use it later, and see, that already looks better. I think there's something more warm and earthy happening here, and that color to me felt way out of left field. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I do think, for instance, like a blue could look really good here, but I kind of want to now lean into this more earthy, warm colors. We are very much seeing the evidence of me starting something and then allowing myself to let it evolve. Purple, orange, blue, brighter blue. It might feel too fall. So I have officially taken this a completely different direction than I was thinking that I would, but here we are. So I'm gonna weave in this orange. I don't know, there's something I'm liking about this almost 70s feel. Maybe that's what I've just been doing in general lately. So then I'm gonna go ahead and start pushing this all down. Now this isn't ideal that I'm doing it this way, but it does work. I'm just gonna be careful to make sure that this weft is straight. So take some time getting that straight. Then I can pull this brown down and then the green. So now the question is, do I start repeating things or do I keep it more random? Like we're gonna use quite a lot of colors in this. I think I'm just gonna have to try things. Okay, so this is another purple that I have, and I'm wondering if maybe that's the purple that I need instead of this one. So this one, you can tell, hopefully on camera you can tell, this has a lot more blue. This still has some pink in it. It's like kind of a cross between purple and pink. Yet again, you guys, we never know where we're gonna end up in these, because I started with a simple amount of materials and then quickly moved to having quite a lot of different materials. Now that's not to say that you couldn't keep repeating materials, but sometimes it's just, I wanna just try some stuff. I wanna play with color. I wanna see how I feel about a wide range of color and how it all goes together in the end. Wow, I honestly really struggled with this piece, and I felt very indecisive about so much of it. You'll see that I even went back and changed out the orange wool to a different purple instead. Listen, I could have started completely over. I could have made this look like it came together a lot smoother, but I wanted to push myself to work with a color palette that felt out of my comfort zone, and I wanted to show you the reality of what this creative process can look like. Sometimes it's gonna be messy, you're gonna question yourself, and you're going to end up unweaving as much as you weave. At times, the goal is to simply complete the piece and to get that creative practice rep in. You might end up with something you absolutely love, and you might end up with something that isn't your favorite thing ever, and that is completely okay. I'm saying this to you because it's also what I have to remind myself of constantly. I hope by watching this and hearing this, you'll feel less intimidated about trying to create your own unique work. Okay. I'm gonna clean up some of my chaos, and then we're going to start tucking in all the ends. The first thing I'm gonna do though, is I'm gonna clean up all the fluff that is left over from weaving on my table. So just grabbing a piece of paper towel or a cloth or something, I'm just gonna wipe all of this up because I don't want all those little flecks of fiber to end up on the front of my piece. A vacuum would be even better, honestly, but I don't have one right now. So I'm gonna flip this over, and then I'm gonna make sure that all of the ends are here in the back. Personally, I like to start with the thickest pieces, so the wool first, just because they tend to be the ones that feel the most kind of in the way. So I can use my little yarn needle here. So it's just a plastic yarn needle. It has a nice big eye. And for these ends, I'm going to weave them back in just by grabbing, you can grab both of these warp strings or even just one, it doesn't matter. And I'm gonna weave them towards the center. And then I'm kind of holding onto this end to pull this through. And then I wanna gently pull this through so that it's meeting up with the edge of my weaving. Now, I might wanna turn this over and see what it's looking like on the front. So I might pull it a little bit tighter than I need first. And then I can flip this back around and decide if that's kind of where I want it or if it needs to be a little bit less. Now the ends on a piece like this are edges, I should say, are not always gonna be like perfectly perfect, and that's fine. But I'm just trying to make sure that everything is as tidy as I can get it without being too terribly perfectionistic about it. Is that even a word? You know, that's looking pretty good there. So then once I have that tucked in where I want it to go, I just sort of lift this up and trim it off, leaving a bit of a tail so it doesn't just easily slip back out. I could have even left that a bit longer, but it's not the end of the world. So I'm gonna go ahead and do all of the roving pieces just like that. So now I've tucked in all of the roving, so I'm gonna move on to the other ends now. So for these really thick cotton string ends, I'm actually gonna weave them in right where the roving is woven in. They do get quite thick, so I don't wanna try to tie them. I don't wanna try to tuck them in really elsewhere. So I'm just gonna kind of weave them back in the same way that I wove in the roving. And could I have done this at the same time? Maybe, but it would have been a little bit challenging to get it through the needle had I done both at the same time. So let's just see. So I want to make sure that that's tight against the edge, which it is. So I'm always checking back at the front to make sure the front is looking good, because the front is definitely the priority. And then I'm gonna go ahead and cut this off. Again, leaving a decently long tail so that that can't just easily slip out. Now remember, it is a woven wall hanging, so ideally, once we're done here, it's not really getting handled, so that's why I'm not too concerned about something like that. If you are really concerned, you can tie a knot, but again, it does get thick, so that's why I'm choosing not to do it that way. So the same is going to be true with my felted yarn. So the stuff that is felted is very dense. It's not going to squish down as easily as a yarn would. So I'm going to be weaving this in the same way that I did the really thick cotton string. So now I'm working on the yarn ends. So as well as these thinner cotton strings. So to do those, I'm going to thread the end into my yarn needle, and then I'm gonna go ahead and, where do I wanna put this? I'm gonna go to this spot where there are multiple loops. So I'm in 2 of the loops just in the back of the weaving. And I'm gonna just leave it there. And again, leaving a little bit of a tail. And that's all there is to it for these ends. Okay, all my ends are tucked in. Now, what I noticed is that I did go a little bit lower than intended. It's only about a 1/4 inch lower, but what I can do is try to kind of lift this up just a little bit, spread things back out just near the top so that it does end up where I wanted it to. So it's still gonna be a little bit shorter than I had originally planned, but honestly, that's not a big deal at all. But if I can move it up a little bit, I will. So now I can just sort of go across and measure, making sure that the top itself is sitting decently evenly. Again, I'm not striving for absolute perfection here, but just kind of double checking that it's fairly straight. So now I'm gonna take this off of the loom. So I'm gonna flip that fringe forward. I'm gonna slip out my cardstock, and then I'm gonna start tying overhand knots at the bottom. So I'm going to grab this first loop and the second one, just like so, and I'm gonna tie an overhand knot. Ooh, that's a little bit tight. And I'm just gonna push that knot right up to the bottom of my weaving without trying to push up that twining stitch any further. Now I had to grab the first one and the second one at the same time just so that I had something to attach this one to. But for the rest, I'm just gonna do one loop at a time, but at the very end, I'll do the same thing I did here. If you have a loom like mine and you're finding it really tight, you can always undo the screws and slip your loom off, or you can even cut your weaving off of your loom if it's really, really tight. Mine is just about too tight, but I'm still able to get my weaving off the loom. You want to be really careful not to ream too hard because sometimes these teeth can break. One way to do it, if you are finding that your piece is really tight on the loom, you can grab these warp strings and pull them towards this side, and see how I'm creating some slack when I do that? And at the same time, I'm just slipping that off the tooth. So I'm just trying to make sure that I have the least amount of pressure on that tooth as possible. Oh, and I can see that I actually forgot to weave in this end. So before I take off those last strings, I'm gonna quickly tuck this in. Okay, so now that that's all tied, I can just slip this off my loom, flip it over, and I'm going to tuck in all of these warp strings back up into the weaving. So you can use your plastic yarn needle like this one to do this process, but I actually really like this metal one. It's a little bit slimmer, so I find it moves through easier, and the warp strings are thin enough that it fits through this eye quite easily. Now that I have the warp strings tucked back into the weaving, I'm gonna go ahead and trim off all the excess. So I'm trimming it pretty close to where I had tucked it in, but I'm making sure that I don't actually cut any of the weft strings or yarns. The next thing I'm gonna do is put the weaving onto the dowel. So I'm gonna grab my little spool holder here, just something to weigh down your weaving as you're doing this. I'm grabbing 2 of the loops at the same time, opening them up, stacking them. Then I'm gonna create my lark's head knot. So to create the lark's head knot, you're going to flip that loop and then bring the 2 loops together. Now another thing you can do, you can go one step further, and once you've flipped this loop, you can actually twist the 2 loops again. So this is particularly helpful if there is quite a gap between the top of your weaving and your dowel. I find that it just helps stabilize the loop a little bit better. And then it creates like a bit of a braid effect right there, and it stays tighter. So I'm gonna do that because I did have some space. So stacking 2 loops, opening them, flipping it, then doing one more twist. So it looks like this, and then stacking those 2 loops together and slipping them onto my dowel. Oh, that's actually kind of tight. So now I'm just evening out all the loops onto my dowel, and then I will add a hanging string. Now the very last thing I'm gonna do is just even out the fringe. So I'm kind of combing it out with my hands here. Then I'm going to go along the bottom and just trim off anything that feels like it's hanging down a little bit too low. All right, it's all done. So let's have a look at the finished piece. All right, that was a true journey of unweaving and weaving. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, check out this one next.